Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, we hear from North Coast Congressman Jared Huffman on the indictment of former President and now criminal defendant Donald Trump, on the closure of salmon season, and on the partisan fight to raise the nation's debt ceiling. Also, the county of Humboldt looks at developing a new day center for homeless folks in Eureka, a facility that would provide them with a safe place to be during daylight hours. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. It's Easter weekend, and as so many celebrate what they believe was the resurrection of Jesus after his crucifixion, we're all witnessing what many also worry may be the denouement of civil American society. Just this week, former President Donald Trump, a man adored by tens of millions of Americans, was indicted on suspicion of fraudulently filing paperwork to cover up an affair with a porn star and bolster his election efforts. 3 more investigations involving Trump are in the offing. Meanwhile, 2 black Democratic representatives were removed from the Tennessee Assembly for breaking decorum, what most consider a minor offense, during a protest against gun violence. 3 were brought before the body, but only 2, both young black lawmakers, were actually removed. Relatedly, almost every other week we hear another report of additional mass shootings, often involving children, while our political leaders struggle to find consensus on how to fix this uniquely American situation. In Washington, D.C., according to ProPublica, a member of the Supreme Court conservative majority, Clarence Thomas, has reportedly been accepting lavish gifts from a billionaire, which he never reported. He denies wrongdoing. The list goes on and on and on. Moral and political issues that all linger on the brink and await action from our elected representatives, who all too often are concerned with re-election over masterminding relevant policy. So as we get gussied up this holiday weekend and many ostensibly celebrate the supernatural resurrection of a savior, we're left awaiting the resurrection of that pragmatic and level-headed American character that made us a superpower to begin with. We sat down with Congressman Huffman this week to talk about a number of these issues and get a better read on how things go in the nation's capital. Huffman believes that the now ongoing prosecution of Trump isn't as strange or exceptional as many claim.
You know, I'm not paying a huge amount of attention to it, to tell you the truth, James. I mean, it shouldn't be all that sensational, all that alarming that a guy who has so brazenly thumbed his nose at the law, might eventually see the law catch up to him. We have had, vice presidents face criminal charges in the case of Spiro Agnew. I guess once upon a time, a sitting president, Ulysses Grant, faced some charges.
That. Yeah.
So I don't know that it's completely without precedent. President Clinton found himself in legal hot water involving perjury over, a seemingly trivial consensual personal matter that got him in big trouble. A vice presidential candidate, John Edwards, saw criminal charges. So, I think we maybe should push back a little against this idea that this is some fundamentally new territory that signals a huge shift in our, national politics and our legal system. I don't think it is.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed is that even though people say that this is a celebration of the triumph of the rule of law, there are still kind of exceptions made for him. Like he's still, allowed to kind of take his time to get there, and he's allowed to set, the table for himself, and he's obviously using it now to fundraise and whatnot. Is there a risk that because you have to accommodate, his former role, I guess, that it can appear to people that this really isn't, every man is subject to the same laws in this country, man and woman, of course?
I think that's an interesting question. If he goes through this legal process only to be pampered and ultimately let off the hook in ways that look inequitable and unfair, it will probably have the opposite effect of reinforcing the rule of law. So, look, I think the best that I can do, and what I urge all my colleagues in politics to do, is just stay out of it. Let the criminal justice system and the legal system do its work and try to keep politics out of it.
Last question on this subject, but there's been a lot of belly aching about the order that these charges were filed. There's 3 other investigations pending, and some people think that the January 6th investigation, for instance, or the Mar-a-Lago documents case are way more substantive. Is it unfortunate that this one went first?
I'm amused when I hear that kind of armchair criminal choreography. Do people really think that's the way our criminal justice system works? That we can sort of sit back and choreograph, whether a Georgia district attorney or a New York state attorney or Manhattan district attorney or the U.S. Department of Justice go first, and how it should never work that way. No one should be, conspiring for political and public perception reasons, the choreography of independent criminal investigations and charges in different jurisdictions. I just would like to believe our system of justice is way better than that. And frankly, the political commentators who engage in that should be better than that too.
Absolutely. Moving on, some major news happened a little while ago. Ground was broken on the removal of the climate dams. That's a project that you've been working on for almost the entirety of your career. What are your thoughts on this occasion?
Oh, it's exciting. This has been a long time coming. One of the best things to happen on the entire North Coast. I will tell you that tomorrow I'll be in San Francisco for a big press event with salmon fishermen and all sorts of fishery officials to lament the fact that we expect a complete closure of the salmon season to be ordered sometime today or in the morning. And I've just seen too many of these fishery closures, too many attempts to give disaster relief to fishermen who can't even go out on the water. Too much damage to the Yurok and the Karuk tribe and the Hoopa Valley tribe and others who have depended on these fisheries for a lot longer, frankly, than our commercial fishing communities. So anything that we can do to bring these rivers and fisheries back to health is just fantastic news. And this is a big one.
Do you support the closure of the salmon season?
I do. I think it's the only management tool you have when you get to a point that's this bad. But let's be clear, we're not closing it because it's overfished. We're not even closing it just because of drought, although drought conditions have contributed to it. We're closing it because people made political and policy decisions to not give fish the water they need.
Do you believe a deal is still possible over the debt ceiling? I know there's been a lot of brinksmanship, but neither side seems to be budging. And does the GOP in Congress have the strength to force Biden to the table?
I don't think so. I think Kevin McCarthy, in order to get those final votes that he needed from some of the most difficult extremists in the Congress, had to make a lot of promises. And one of them was that he would walk the plank on the debt ceiling, go through the motions of basically holding the global financial system hostage to try to exact concessions. So he has to do that. But I think we have the numbers to go around him, and we should be able to get to a clean debt ceiling solution. We have to, right? Because the full faith and credit of the United States is still a really big deal. And I don't think we want to see the global economy go off a cliff.
Now, Joe Manchin on CNN this weekend was talking about we need to talk to the GOP and negotiate a little bit, that there's always room to cut some fat, basically is what he implied. Is there no place where you could see that maybe some cuts would be warranted, or is opening that sort of menu opening Pandora's box?
Well, look, if you're saying that the defense budget is off the table and Medicare and Social Security are off the table, that leaves very little else to make up significant ground on budget cuts. And so that is not a fair way to go about this. That's what the House Republicans are demanding. If Joe Manchin wants to engage in negotiations on those terms, shame on him. But what we have told our Republican colleagues is show us your plan. If you think there are ways to find significant savings while taking those huge swaths of the budget off the table and focusing only on the other discretionary spending items, show us what you would do. Because I think even they would probably not stand by their own proposal. The cuts would be so extreme to veterans benefits, to just about everything you can think of, to law and order, which they claim to care about. Well, all the law enforcement funding falls into that category as well. So there's really no way to get there on the terms that House Republicans have articulated. And I think Manchin is just playing a little bit of politics.
If the January 6th investigation reveals that there were members of the House GOP caucus that were involved in plotting the insurrection on January 6th, would you support their removal? And is there a risk there that the control of the House could flip that way and people would see it as almost a kind of quiet coup?
Well, I think the January 6th Select Committee did reveal complicity and involvement by several members of the House. And that's in spite of the fact that they refused to cooperate. They refused to testify. They refused to provide documents. But we know enough to know that several of our colleagues in Congress were absolutely in the thick of it. And so would I support their expulsion? Look, of course I would. I don't think they deserve to serve in Congress if they were complicit in an attempt to violently prevent the transfer of power. But do I have the numbers to make that happen? No, I don't. And so realistically, it is not going to happen. But I think they will occupy a place of shame in the history books, and that may be as good as we can do with those members of Congress.
This is, this whole issue, again, is emblematic of this deep divide that runs in the country, a divide that's fed by, partisan news organizations probably on both sides. How do we begin to heal this divide that we have, given that we have social media continuing to, irritate the situation by working on an algorithm that sort of gets, funnels the worst information to the, worst sorts of people? How do we begin to heal?
There's no one thing that is going to make that happen, James. Unfortunately, you're exactly right when you talk about the monetizing of conflict. That is a big part of this. The way we get our information in this day and age is fundamentally different than it was a generation ago. And people have figured out that there's big money in keeping people angry, afraid, misinformed, in a constant state of agitation and conflict. And that's what those algorithms do. That's what a lot of these cable news programs do. So how are we going to change that? I think we're going to have to rediscover the value of civility and just governing other things that may not be good for business at cable news platforms and social media platforms. But they're really important to our ability to live with each other as neighbors and fellow Americans. So the best I can do is urge people to change the way they get their information, to not rely on YouTube and Facebook and Fox News or even MSNBC for all their information. I'm sure grateful for public broadcasting. That's why I'm always happy to appear on your show and any of the other public broadcasting outlets I have in my district.
Well, I appreciate that, sir, as do our viewers. So to switch gears a little bit to get to some, I guess you'd say foreign affairs, the TikTok ban. That's been proposed. Some people think it's going over the top, but is it actually, do you think, a national security threat, and do you support the ban?
I think given TikTok's obvious ownership by the Communist Party, the regime in China, it is an issue. They've got so much data and so much visibility into the lives of millions of Americans that we do need some kind of a firewall, some kind of assurance that will not be misused in a way that threatens our national interests. So I think there's a way to do that without banning TikTok. And I think that's where this will eventually settle out. Probably some kind of an ownership shift will be required, some kind of a firewall between a subsidiary that takes over the operations and the maintenance of the data and the Chinese government. And we should not just do that for TikTok. We should do that for all state-owned enterprises that have this kind of presence in the U.S. market.
Do you have TikTok on your phone?
I don't. My son sure does, though.
And as do mine.
Yeah, he's very concerned about a possible ban of TikTok. Very opposed to it.
Yeah. You hear
yeah,
all about that, right?
I know what millions of Americans are feeling right now. They love the platform. It's totally addictive, and we can probably let them have their TikTok fix without compromising our national interests if we're smart about this.
Yeah. Kevin McCarthy met with the president of Taiwan, and Nancy Pelosi had visited Taiwan before that, both of which sort of, severely aggravated the Chinese. Do you think that we're playing with fire there? I mean, is there potential for some kind of conflagration with China? And wouldn't it be regrettable to have issues like this sort of lead to that?
Well, we have consequences for every decision we make when it comes to this and Ukraine. So, there would be consequences if we were to leave Taiwan hanging out to dry. I think China would look for that kind of an opening, and they're signaling in every possible way that they would consider an attempted military takeover of Taiwan. And if we care about our allies and democracy and freedom, as we have always said we do, we need to try to find ways to prevent that from happening. And deterrence is probably the best way. So I support a strong relationship with Taiwan. But I think we've got to find a way, kind of across the board in all our dealings with China, to be less bellicose, to tone down the vitriol. There is some gratuitous saber rattling that's happening on the American side and on the Chinese side. But I don't think we want a conflict with China. Uh, they're still a major trading partner. They are still intertwined in significant ways in our economy. And they're also just a huge nation that we shouldn't want to go to. We shouldn't want to go to war with anyone. So I would love to see us be a little more thoughtful, a little more diplomatic in our rhetoric and our engagement. But I don't disagree with either Speaker Pelosi or my congressional colleagues who recently met with the president of Taiwan. Taiwan is a vibrant, thriving democracy, and the people of Taiwan do not want to be consumed by this big uh, communist state that would fundamentally change their quality of life, their economy, their freedoms. I am sympathetic to their aspirations.
And it's a transformation that they've seen with Hong Kong. So all of
Exactly.
what they can predict is laid out right in front of them. You mentioned Ukraine. Finland has joined NATO and it dramatically extended the Russian border with NATO. Some have argued that the war in Ukraine was meant to accomplish that very purpose. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's one heck of a interesting conspiracy theory. I think you have to really strain to connect fuzzy dots to come to that conclusion. The war in Ukraine, I think, was quite obviously about Vladimir Putin's nationalist empire building aspirations and his nostalgia, if you will, for the Soviet empire that evaporated in the 90s. So I think it's as simple as that. It's as the age-old story of an ambitious dictator that wants to invade and take over neighbors, and that usually doesn't end well. So I have been supportive of our strong support of Ukraine. I don't, I think to argue that somehow we orchestrated this or wanted to see this so we could expand NATO is a pretty frivolous argument.
There's been reports by legendary journalist Cy Hirsch, among others, that the attack on Germany's Nord Stream pipeline was likely an American operation. Do you have any thoughts on that? And would it be appropriate to have such an undercover operation happen in the midst of a war between two other parties?
Yeah, I've read the Cy Hirsch article, and it is extremely well written. Whatever else you may say about him, he knows how to write a thrilling, sort of pseudo-investigative journalism article that draws you in and makes all sorts of interesting things seem plausible. But at the heart of it is his contention that President Joe Biden directly ordered the sabotaging and destruction of these pipelines. There is, based on everything I know, there's zero chance that actually happened. It ignores, who Joe Biden is, his cautious approach to these things, all of the different checks and balances that would kick in around him, because that would be a direct military action against Russia. Joe Biden is a guy who, wouldn't even provide certain types of lethal aid until almost a year into the Ukraine conflict because he was so concerned about escalation with Russia. So I don't buy it at all. And Mr. Hirsch's premise has taken a real hit with the recent revelation that some pro-Ukrainian groups appear to have been the ones who blew up the pipeline. That makes a lot more sense to me.
What would you do if it turned out that Joe Biden was behind it? What would be an
Well,
appropriate response from Congress, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an absurd hypothetical. There's absolutely no evidence. Even Hirsch doesn't cite any evidence of that. He talks about unnamed secret sources that he refuses to identify. And I think it was a single unnamed source. So there's just not even enough credibility in that for me to dignify it with a hypothetical, James. It did not happen.
Okay.
Anyone who believes that happened, is just choosing to embrace an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory that makes no sense to me.
To go back into sort of your areas of expertise, Biden approved the Willow drilling project in Alaska.
Yeah.
And all around that, he did a bunch of conservation moves, maybe to make it more palatable. But what do you think about that? And was it the right move given our efforts long term to get off of fossil fuels?
It was a terrible move. It is impossible to reconcile the opening up of this, the largest public lands oil and gas development, oil development that we have seen in decades, from a president who said he would not do this very thing, and also from a president who has set appropriately very ambitious climate goals. If you look at the carbon pollution reduction benefits that we can potentially get from what we passed in the last Congress, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act, I've seen some numbers suggest that the carbon bomb of the Willow project could erode as much as 30 or 40% of the carbon pollution reduction from the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is a terrible move. I've been very blunt in my criticism of the Biden administration in doing this. And, I will support every possible effort to block it, unwind it, find some way to stop it, because you can't do this. If you're serious about the climate crisis, you can't take, one step forward and then another step back. That's losing.
Okay, and the $65 million release of money from the feds for the Trinity River hatchery upgrades, can you tell us what that work will accomplish?
Yeah, it's going to modernize this aging and neglected hatchery facility so that it can help with the conservation of some really critical species, including coho salmon. So it's very important, and I would like to see even more federal investment in the Trinity River system. We have some challenges with the management of cold water in the Trinity River because of the way the release mechanism works from Trinity Lake. The water in the spring is too cold for juvenile salmon to grow as fast as we want them to grow. And increasingly, we're finding that that's a limiting factor in the success of our salmon recovery there. So I want to see some major federal investments in modifying and upgrading the water release system from Trinity Lake so we can control temperature better and help grow larger, fatter juvenile salmon that'll have a better chance of survival. But this certainly is good news because we're going to need this hatchery as a backstop to our recovery efforts for these fish.
Well, that's all our time for today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you soon.
This decision will shape the downtown area for 50 to 100, 150 years to come.
The Eureka City Council Tuesday decided to sell or lease waterfront properties between C and F Street. To meet state housing requirements, the city is soliciting developers to build at least 95 very low-income units in mixed-use buildings that will replace the existing dirt parking lot.
A high concentration of residential development tends to privatize the waterfront and intrude upon and limit public use. This new precedent would surely deprive the citizens of Eureka access to this beloved asset. Participants in the 2015 city-sponsored C2F waterfront design charrette overwhelmingly preferred a plan that included more open space and outdoor recreational opportunities.
We have a housing crisis. We need to build housing. And we could spend all day coming up with every single little problem that we might see with every single proposal that will come in front of you. Or we can finally prioritize our friends and neighbors who need this housing.
Beautiful Old Town needs this parking area for events such as Friday night market, farmers market, Arts Alive, etc., as well as daily business use. I have 3 legally permitted Airbnbs in Old Town. I have had many tourists cancel their stay before they even get to my property just from driving in the neighborhood due to feeling unsafe from the issues of transients in the area. I believe these cancellations will increase if very low income housing gets put here, decreasing income to me and the city. It would also decrease everyone's property values in Old Town.
This is people that work in restaurants. This is people that work in motels, hotels, teachers. These are people, because I heard a lot of negative talk.
To qualify for the apartments, a single person would have to make less than roughly $24,000 a year, a family of 4 less than roughly $31,000. The City Council voted 3-2 with Council members Moulton and Contreras de Loche dissenting to include the waterfront parcels among 14 public parking lots the city is converting to housing. In response, a new group called Citizens for a Better Eureka filed a lawsuit yesterday to block the conversions pending further study of traffic, air quality, public safety, and pedestrian impacts. Among others, the group includes Rob Arkley, Security National, and former Eureka elected officials.
Several years ago, it was identified that if we had a place like a day center, somewhere where people could be that was safe during the day, that would be one solution to multiple problems.
A few blocks south on the same Eureka waterfront, Humboldt County government plans to buy property and build a homeless navigation center offering showers, drinking water, and laundry, along with computer labs and secure places to store personal belongings. Social workers and community groups will guide clients to other services. The center would also provide overnight shelter to roughly 15 individuals or couples in private rooms.
Can't tell people to move on unless they have somewhere to go to. Now we have an option. We have a navigation center.
And it gives people opportunity to help themselves. And I think that's critical. You know, we just had to have a cold weather shelter down in southern Humboldt. And if there was a facility like this down there, that need wouldn't be, because we would already have that. I know that there is groups working towards this goal in almost every community in Humboldt County.
Homeless service centers, much like very low-income housing, frequently attract opposition from neighbors worried about increased crime, drug use, and litter. But officials note that homeless people already congregate across the street for St. Vincent de Paul's free lunch program.
We're going to be moving a new police substation at the foot of Commercial that will be located in close proximity to this. We have every intention on holding a joint meeting, a public meeting, and notifying everybody in the area and having discussions and express any concerns about this to make sure that we can mitigate those concerns.
Have a happy Easter weekend, everybody. Stay tuned. Stay informed.